Hey everybody. Okay, been working on this forever. Let's hope it goes through. Binding. Quick and easy way. All these things that we've been making, the table runners, and we started out doing them as pot holders, joining them as table runners. Missy Billingsley did wall hangings for Christmas that said Noel. So I did these ones that say love. The way that I'm putting them together is a little different than, oh, here's the Noel, is a little different than how other people do it. This technique has been around since the 80s, if not longer. I don't know when it came out. It's quilt in the hoop, quilt as you go. And you take all your blocks and they're completely finished in the hoop. We've done videos on how to do that. I'll be making another one just labeling table runner, quilt as you go. When I just made these today, and I wanted to do it for Easter, and it's going to be a table runner. So one thing that I do that a lot of people do not do is I use the Pellon. It's Steam-A-Seam, the Steam 2 light pressure. It's kind of like a double-sided tape until you iron it, then it becomes fusible web. And this is at Joann's. Use your coupon for 60% off. Get it at a good price. I'm thinking that's $5 or $6 for 20 yards. I've gone through almost, this is a newer spool, this is a used one, but it's like a double-sided tape. And there's also the Steam-A-Seam 2, which was, I think this was one of the originals, and it's really good. These both come in 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. I prefer the 1/2 inch, but Steam-A-Seam 2, the lady that did this one did all these little snippets. Her thing was called snippets. And the other thing that we have, this is what we started out using, was the Heaton Bond. Now this is Heaton Bond Light. I buy like 100 yards at a time. If you don't want to spend the money on this, because that's a lot of money if you figured up per yard how much that costs versus this. These I've already cut into like 8 by 8 squares. Therefore, when I do applique, I put it on the back so that when I cut the applique, it doesn't fuzz around and do eyelashes. But what I did when I ran out of this, and before we ever had that in the home, I would cut 1/2 inch strips of this and use it. This is much cheaper. So if you have this and you don't want to run out, use the Heaton Bond. And that's light, but you can use the regular. The light doesn't, you don't get as heavy a feel. This is nice and pliable. The other thing is there is one that is just double-sided tape, and it's wash away. You can use this, but it's very much more expensive. Jenny Haskins has one too. Most of the stabilizers I've seen have R&K on the back. For Floriani, OESD, Jenny Haskins, and the distributor is R&K. So you can probably find it. This was 10 yards of 1/2 inch for $8. And that's at a dealer, so, a sewing machine dealer, so it's not going to have a coupon. But, the other thing that you can use is Elmer's glue stick and wash away, and that would work just fine. And we have used an iron. After you put the glue stick on the back, you give it a little, put it on top, give it a little press. Quilters use it. Okay, now, to do this binding technique, you do not want to do it if you're entering a quilt in a quilt show. My way is not for a quilt show. This is just quick and easy. So first thing we're going to do is put all of our blocks together. And the blocks, these are done in the 9.5 inch hoop, and I've used the 9.5 inch square. So when I cut these, I laid my ruler on the, it's not a basting stitch because I go into Designer and IQ, and I put in that square and I sew it. It does a double stitch because I want something to lay my ruler on top of. You don't have to lay that in there, but I do that, especially when I'm floating. I do that so that my material doesn't move. Now, you wouldn't think that this would have had much puckering or anything, but before the stippling went in, this had quite a bit of puckering. This rabbit, I definitely hooped it. I did not float it because it was really puckering when I tried to float it. So what you want to do is decide, do you want a wall hanging or do you want a table runner? Vertical, horizontal. We're doing horizontal. So what you do is you take your two blocks and you set them side by side, and you want them to be as close to perfect next to each other as you can possibly get them. And if you've cut them all exactly the same, they should be pretty close. If not, before you do the binding, take it to your table and just use your rotary cutter and ruler and remove part of it. I'm using number 10 zigzag, and I've got it on 3.5 width and 1.8 length. You can do smaller, you can do larger. This is just holding the two blocks together until I put the sashing on. This part, everybody does this if you're doing a quilt in the hoop this way. Like I said, this has been around since the 70s or 80s. I remember my friend trying to explain it to me when I owned my business, and she's sitting there explaining to me how to do quilt as you go, and I'm like, that makes no sense whatsoever to me. I had to see it, and I had read about it in magazines and books, and I could not figure it out. So then you're going to want to cut any threads and everything, because we're going to be putting binding on this. Now first we do the sashing. For the sashing on this one, I'm doing everything tone in tone. Normally I cut it 2 inches. I cut this one 1.5, and then you'll lay your fusible web on your sashing strip. After you fold it in half, if you take a 2.5 inch sashing strip, what you'll do is you can either fold it in half and iron it, and then open it up and use that center line. I'm sorry, I'm saying so much tonight. Use that center line, and then you just fold each side into the line and iron it down. Like so. You would fold each into the line and iron it down. I tend not to do the folding it in half and ironing first, because that line doesn't really go away completely, and I don't want the look. But you know, if you need to, until you get used to what the I'm thinking it's about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Probably 1/2 inch that you're folding over. So you fold it and then you give it a good press, and that is your sashing stitch. Your binding stitch, we're doing 2.5 inch, and you can also use 2.5 inch for your sashing, whatever you want. I'm using 1.5 on this one. But then you iron the fusible web to the back. All packages will be different. This one is, I believe, 10 seconds. And it doesn't say, I don't think it says anything about steam. It does say to put damp cloth over it. I don't do that. What I do is I make sure that my sashing is longer than my project. This is way longer. But I make sure that it's longer so that I can meet the front and the back together, and that way they're exactly in the same spot as each other. So I'll lay the front down, and I'm covering up the stitches that are on the edge and the zigzag that we used. And then I'm going to lay the iron on. This is the front, and I'm going to lay the iron on and fuse this down. Then I'm going to turn it over, and you see that the sashing is on either side, it's extended. I take the back sashing, make sure you're sticky. See how this is double-sided? See how it just sticks to me? You may not even need to iron it down if you don't want to. Then I take that and I lay it on top, and I match it up perfectly with the back. This is kind of the step that I do different, I believe, than most people. There's probably somebody that does it exactly like me, and I'm fine with that. Just do it. Alright, after I do that, then I take it to the sewing machine, and you have an option. Do you want it to be zigzagged or straight stitch. I like the zigzag. I just like the way it looks. I like this number 15 zigzag, and it's set at a 5.0 length, so I'm going to drop it to a 4. And I don't know why I like I think it's a stretch stitch or something like that. I'm not a seamstress. I do not sew clothing, so I don't use any of the stitches on this machine to make clothing. Everything I do is crafting. So what you're going to do, after you iron those down, you're going to sew each side. This makes it definitely permanent. Now, I do believe that this fusible web will hold up, but I don't know. This is, if you're doing table runners and stuff, you want to be able to put them through the washer. So I would definitely fuse it and iron it. But there is, Stitch Witchery has a tape that is a fusible web that does hems, so maybe it doesn't wash out at all. I don't think it would, but you don't really want to be using this fusible web and stuff if you're doing quilt shows, especially, because they don't like it. I don't enter quilt shows either. I do quilt, but I don't enter shows. After you sew it, then you take your scissors and just equal each side up so that it's the same as your table runner, so that it's even, and throw those pieces out. Then what you'll do is take I've got 2 of them here. Take 2.5-inch strips cut along the width of the fabric. You'll take 2 of them, and this one I've already used part of it. You're going to take part of it, and now that's if these aren't super long and wide. On this size, being 9.5 inches or 8 inches, or the smaller ones that I do, I will take 1 piece off of each strip that I've cut, and that's what's going to go across the top and the bottom. Each strip I'll get 1 piece for my binding for the top, and this strip I got the binding for the bottom here, and then I'll also have the binding for the sides off of each strip. If they're longer, if your project is longer than 4 of these squares, then you're going to need to piece some strips together. And that's not hard. You can either do a seam, or you can do in my binding, maybe, I need to put this on a straight. What you're going to do next, talking and not telling you what I'm doing, what you're going to do next here is you're going to put your machine on a straight stitch. You're going to lay the raw edges, because you've got a 2.5-inch binding strip that you have folded in half and ironed. So you're going to take the 2 raw edges and lay them on the outside raw edges of your project with a little bit of overlap on each side. You're going to lay it, I'm using number 4 straight stitch, and I find that if I use number 4 and it runs, it's in the center of this foot, and it runs with the material on the perfect edge of this foot, I have a 1/4 inch seam. So I have my seam here. Now, this is where we take, I do it a little different than others because they haven't folded it in half, I don't believe. Or maybe they do. I don't know. I don't remember. I saw Missy doing it and I was like, oh, that's different. So I don't do it the same way as a lot of people, but maybe it's the area that I live. Alright, so after you sew it down, you're going to take a piece of your adhesive and you're going to lay it on the very edge, then you're going to iron it down, and it's 10 seconds. Then you have to let it cool off a minute. I've already got this one over here done. Then you peel off the paper. Now when it cools this long, the paper almost always, I guarantee you, almost always rips. So if you're just kind of careful with it, you get it all off and then try to get it off your hands. Then you're going to take it and you're going to fold it over to the back. And what you're going to want to do is pull it at the same time, and then it's got that sticky fusible on it, so you're going to pull it as far over as you can, and you're going to want to cover up the stitches that you can see, the stitches that you just did sewing the front on. So as you pull it and turn it over, then you're going to iron and go to this side and pull some more. And what you want to do is make sure you cover the stitches from the front. If you get the front covered, when you go and stitch in the ditch, it's going to definitely cover this seam that we did for the back. Otherwise, you have to go back in and you have to go over a few spots. I've done that where I didn't get it perfect. So you pull it over. Now we're going to stitch in the ditch, which is, the ditch is right here, right where your sewing line is. That's the ditch. And we're going to do a straight stitch, and we're going to just go from one end to the other. I'm not back stitching because it's going to cross your in quilting. You don't back stitch a lot because you cross your stitches from previous stitching a lot when you're doing this. Okay, so I'm at the other end. When I get there, I'm going to cut my threads, and then your stitches cover the back. If you look and you missed a spot, just put it back under, and then trim your edges so that they're equal. Now I've got one ready. The next thing that you do, you're going to do the opposite end. I always start with the short ends and do the exact same thing, where you tear the tape off, turn it to the back, and fuse it, and then stitch in the ditch. After you do that, you're going to take your next piece of binding, and you're going to lay it from one end to the other, and you're going to want it to be at least a ½ inch larger than either side of your project, because after we sew it, we're going to turn under, okay? So for the second part, I'll show you on this one. I'll just do, for this one's ready. So you'll put this together, and you'll want it to be a little longer than your project, and then just sew straight. And you're going to go all the way from one end to the other. Now, one thing I do when I'm doing this is I start sewing on this fabric that's extended past. I do start here so that when I turn this fabric over, it stays together. Okay, so you'll sew the whole length, okay? After you sew that whole length, it's going to look like this. And what you'll want to do is, you've got your extended end. You're going to look and see where your binding is here, and you want to take a piece of the tape and put it so that it's even with that edge across the top here. It's even with this line, and iron it down. This is what's finishing the edge of your binding. And then you're going to take the paper away, turn over. This is why you want a ½ inch, because you got ½ inch of the binding tape. So you want to cover it, or else it's going to get all over your iron. And then just iron it, and then you'll take, so both ends you've turned under ½ inch, and use your, I keep going to call it stitch witchery because it really kind of is, but your Pellon, your steam 2, you're going to take your tape after you've turned under and ironed both ends and put it along the edge, tear it, and go ahead and iron it down. See, I wish I were a teacher at a sewing store, because this would all be samples that I'm making. Who am I going to give this to? I've given my family almost everything I've ever sewn. After you iron it down, you're going to tear away the tape and do exactly the same thing. It's basically repetitive, the whole thing. So you take your binding and you turn it to the back, and it's got a little stick to it, but it doesn't really hold that well. So I kind of do it like, 4 or 5 inches, and then iron, get it to hold. Then you kind of pull at the same time that you're turning it to the back. And you want to make sure that you're covering up those stitches, because if you don't cover the stitches, you definitely won't be sewing over the back of the binding when you're stitching in the ditch. Now, this is, if you were a true quilter, you're never going to put a binding on like this, ever. A true quilter more than likely would be sewing all of this by hand. I don't do anything by hand. I have a fake joint. So it really hurts me to do stuff by hand. After I iron it down, I do the exact same thing. Straight stitch, stitch in the ditch. And so I think I probably came up with this little way of doing this when I had my thumb joint replaced, because I definitely wasn't going to do hand stitching anymore. And everything I'm doing is holiday. It's all cutesy stuff. Now here you might want to do a back stitch, just a tiny back stitch on the start and the finish, because it's the final layer. But after that, see, I did miss this little tiny spot right here. I missed a spot. And so I'll just put it back under, and I'll do it from the back so I see it. This isn't that big a deal to me. I'm not a perfectionist. I'm OCD about many things. This is not one of them. Okay, so then we do the other side, and these already have the edges turned in, and then the tape, you iron it on, peel it off, turn it, and sew it. I hope you understand this one. If it's not very good, I'll watch it and I'll redo it. The next one I'm going to do is the right way to do binding, because I know how to do it. I just don't do it that often. And I will not show you stitching by hand, because I don't do stitching by hand. I'll talk to you soon.